You're listening to the Straight A Conspiracy Podcast.
Feelings.
So many feelings.
So yes, ladies and gentlemen, the third thing that you need to know about your brain is emotions. Or as Katie has made it a point of saying, feelings. Yes, we all have feelings. Congratulations. And those feelings drive our thinking much more than most of us realize. Because often we've picked up feelings about things from the people around us, from the environment, and they can drive our choices for years and years without us even knowing that that's what they're doing.
That's right. Here on the Straight A Conspiracy Podcast, we told you about automaticity.
Mm-hmm.
We told you about attention. Those two things are all you need to learn anything. But there's a reason that you haven't learned anything and everything so far. And that's because of emotions. That's because emotions also dictate how your learning process goes. And I think, when people talk about emotions, it feels very fuzzy. And we sort of think of emotions as this thing that, they kind of spring up whenever they spring up. And we don't really have much control over them. And, they happen and they come and they go away. And you just sort of deal with them as they go. But that's actually not the case. And you have a ton of control over your emotions. So today we're going to kind of get into why, how they work and why they're so good at sabotaging you if you don't stay in the driver's seat.
Well, I think it's also worth clearing up before we even go into that, is talking about, there's this idea of reason that floats around, particularly in Western culture, and this idea that I'm being rational, you're being emotional, right? And you hear this all the time in arguments and disagreements. Often, my favorite is when people are having a romantic disagreement and suddenly somebody starts screaming at the other person, "You're being emotional!" And it's like, pretty sure, dude, that you're being emotional.
Yep.
And in fact, we're all always being emotional.
Yep.
So, a lot of this comes down to, Descartes a long time ago. Descartes, who is most famous for Cartesian coordinates. So the coordinates that you do on graph paper, when you plot y equals mx plus b. Yeah, well, this guy also had theories about the brain hundreds of years before we really knew very much about the brain. And he had this theory that, reason and emotion were separate, that there was this state.
That they're two different coordinate planes.
Yeah, exactly. There's the x-axis and the y-axis.
And then graph your emotion and see where they meet.
Yeah. And the crucial thing is that now we know that's not true.
Nope.
We know, if you think about it, it's actually a super odd idea that somehow there's like an emotional part of the brain and then a rational part of the brain, and somehow they're not connected. I got some news. Everything is connected in the body and the brain, and it all feeds off of each other in all these very interesting and complex ways. But crucially, there's a great book called Descartes' Error, which is all about some of the experiments that helped us to realize that thinking and feeling are always linked.
You are always emotional.
Always.
And that's okay. That's a good thing. And it was an especially good thing back when, in the beginnings of humanity, in our caveman times, when we used emotions extremely to our advantage, right? Because you have basic emotions like fear, like anger. When you are afraid, the blood in your body flows to your feet so that you can run away. When you're angry, all of your blood flows to your fists so you can fight. And when you were a caveman, that was a great response, because if you're going about your little caveman or even hunter-gatherer way, and then you come across a saber-toothed tiger, you don't really want your brain to be like, oh, let's hang out and analyze this intricate pelt and the design on it, and I wonder how many centimeters long those teeth are. No! You don't have time for any of that. You gotta get out of there. That's a tiger.
Well, and even let's just think about what happened to the ancestor who was like, what pointy teeth you have.
I wonder if I could come up with a classification system in taxonomy for what this guy...
Yeah.
No, he got eaten. He's
got
the one
eaten.
that got eaten.
He's not.
Everyone
he's no
else's
longer
emotions
alive.
saved them. He did not get saved.
Well, and it's interesting, even the words that scientists tend to use for this. They talk about amygdala hijack, right? So it's literally like fear hijacks your body. It's like being.
Well, what's the amygdala? Do you want to explain
Well,
that?
so the amygdala, and we won't go too far into like the structures of the brain, but the amygdala is usually plucked out as it's this. Amygdala means almond. You actually have two amygdalas. But the point is that it's this part of the brain that fires up in response to threats.
Yep.
And so all the responses that Katie is talking about with fear that I am sure that you have experienced at some point.
Fight or flight.
Flight.
You guys have all heard that expression. I was so scared I couldn't think.
Yeah.
Like that is what happens. Your brain gets flooded. Your attention gets flooded. It gets hijacked, and then you can't think of anything, which is good because you can't afford the distractions. Because you have to escape the threat.
So, but the interesting thing is that even if we look at Katie, right, there's Katie that we know and love, but the point is that there's actually many Katies. There's a fear Katie, there's a joy Katie, there's a sad Katie, there's a Katie who's in awe of things. Whoa. There's a curious Katie. And so, the point is that all of these emotions are there and they're there for us all the time. And there's a reason, for example, that emojis are the truly global language.
Universal language, yeah.
You may not, you and we could take a person, who speaks English, a person who takes Spanish, a person who speaks Chinese, and they may not speak each other's verbal languages, and yet they can communicate a lot with emojis.
Yeah.
Because we all recognize those facial expressions.
Well, those emotions are universal. And that's even, and this goes back to our, what you sort of think of as like your lizard brain, like your most reptilian, like survival brain. But really, even if you think about mammals, you can see, not cats because they're just snooty all the time. They only have one emotion. Sorry, cat people. But dogs, I have a dog. And, my husband and I spend our entire lives constantly projecting narratives onto Beasley. But it's because we can read her face.
That's right.
And we can tell when she's excited about something, when she's sad about something, when she's kind of annoyed with us because we punished her.
And when she's done something she should be ashamed of.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Her tail
Shame
goes
face.
between her legs.
Big time.
The shame face settles
Big time.
on. So we can all read these facial expressions and read these emotional expressions. And so crucially, this is your emoji maker, right?
Yeah.
It broadcasts all of these emotions all the time. And, if you pay attention and you look at the face, the tone of voice, the body language, there's a huge amount of emotional information that is being projected all the time.
And your emotions are always going. So
Yeah.
you can't ignore them as part of the process of learning.
Yeah.
And the reality is that if you are a caveman facing a saber-toothed tiger, having a fight or flight response, having that fear response where your brain is hijacked is an excellent choice for that situation. But fast forward some millennia to 2017, and now you're a student sitting in front of a math test that lands on your desk in front of you, and you have that same fight or flight fear response. And guess what? Just like it always has for the history of humanity, your amygdala hijacks your attention, floods your brain. Like, you can't concentrate on the thing that's in front of you.
So what you're saying, Katie, is that you're not saying fear is bad.
I'm not saying fear is bad. I'm saying fear is very appropriate when it makes sense to be afraid of something. But you have to understand what fear can do. Because all the time, we have students who come to us and they say, I studied all night. I knew all of the information going into the test. And then I just blanked. I couldn't remember any of what was on there. We've all had that experience, right? And it's because you become afraid, and then essentially your brain, to try to protect you, erases all of the thinking power that it has, right? You basically can't think. It's true. When you're so scared you can't think, that is accurate.
But see, what's interesting, Katie, is that, you're talking about emotions in a very different way from how most people talk about it. Most people tend to think that there are good emotions and bad emotions. Like joy is good,
Yeah.
curiosity is good, but fear and sadness are bad. And you're not saying that. What you're saying is
they're bad. Yeah,
no.
you need them all. But
They're
certain
all
ones
tools.
are better or worse for learning.
That's right. And so crucially, they're all tools. They're all useful, but there are places where they're appropriate and places where they're inappropriate.
Yes.
And a lot of this is reminding me of one of my favorite movies. I went on a first date to go see it, and I knew that it was going to be a bad first date because I knew that as soon as I went to go see this movie, I was going to bawl my eyes out, and it was going to be
obviously
a
Pixar
lot.
movie that we're about to talk about.
Yeah, it was a Pixar movie.
Yeah, there we go.
And it was Inside Out.
Yeah.
And let me tell you that it made for a horrible.
Although I barely survived lava, I have to say.
But it made
It's
for
already a disaster.
Yeah.
And by Bing Bong, it was all over for me.
Bing Bong.
I can't even. Let's not even go there. A podcast is not an appropriate time to have this level of sadness, so we have to move on.
But and I felt, nor was it a first date an appropriate place to have that level of emotionality. But anyway, but it was a great movie, and what a lot of people don't realize about Inside Out is that it was actually part of it was that it was developed with Paul Ekman, who is the guy who did all the work on facial expressions and Lie to Me is based on. He's an amazing scientist. Yep. And then Dacher Keltner, who was his student and then has studied power. So, there's like some hardcore science that's woven in there. And the hardcore science...
Plus Amy Poehler, yay!
Plus Amy Poehler. But the hardcore science is that idea of emotions being appropriate or inappropriate. And crucially, spoiler alert, the movie is about figuring out, what does sadness do? What is it good for? So they're clear in the movie that joy has a purpose. They're clear that fear keeps you safe from dangers, right? The way that you're talking about snakes.
Yep.
They're clear that disgust keeps you from eating things that are potentially poisonous or deadly.
Yep.
Or
just
rotten
seafood
meat,
in general
or
for
seafood in general for you. And that anger is appropriate for sort of establishing and maintaining boundaries, right? So if people are violating your boundaries. The question is, what does sadness do? And what sadness does, spoiler alert, is that it basically sort of signals to everybody in your community that you're hurting and that, now is a time for the community to rush in and sort of take care of you. So this is a very, when we're talking about feelings, and this is where it sort of ties back into what I was saying at the beginning, because of this idea of reason and emotion being separate, there's often, you're going to hear this idea that reason is good and emotions are bad because emotion clouds our thinking. And the key thing is, what we now know from all of this neuroscience is that it's that emotions are good. They all serve a function, but then it's about thinking about, when are they appropriate? What is an appropriate time to be scared? What is an appropriate time to be angry? What is an appropriate time to be disgusted? What is an appropriate time for all of these things? And what is an inappropriate time? There are also inappropriate times to be joyful. Yeah. Right? You can or laughing at things that probably you shouldn't be laughing at.
Right.
I will never forget when my mother talked about an experience of inappropriate joy in response to Pulp Fiction, where she found herself laughing at things that she should not be laughing at. And so, that whether emotions are appropriate or inappropriate, that's the way that we teach our students to think about it, and that's where all of the science is sort of adding up to.
Yeah, well, and the other part of this, particularly when it comes to learning, acquiring new skills, being in school, any of that stuff, is understanding that emotions are always happening and kind of teaching yourself, training yourself to track them as they happen. Because I think a lot of us get into that scenario where there's a pop quiz suddenly in front of us and we start to panic. But instead of saying, oh, I know what this is, I'm afraid, but it's not reasonable to be afraid and it's not going to help me in this scenario because this piece of paper can't actually kill me and I'm doing myself a disservice by not being able to think straight, essentially, right? Instead of doing that, we just go, oh my God, what's wrong with me that I can't think of any of this material? What's wrong with my brain? Why am I such an idiot? I thought I knew this. I guess I don't know anything. And we immediately attribute it to our intelligence instead of to an emotional response that we can totally understand.
And that we can manage and handle.
And that we can manage and handle. And so a lot of it is also about understanding when you're afraid, when you're angry, when you're frustrated, and also when you're feeling good, engaged, curious, and how those things affect the learning process. and what you can do to kind of emotionally set yourself up to be in a good place to learn.
Right.
Because those things become self-fulfilling prophecies too, right? If you are in a good, positive emotional state about the thing you're learning, say you're in your favorite class or you're learning some new skill you've always wanted to learn, the guitar, right? You're going into it with openness, positivity, curiosity, so it doesn't feel like work. So you get into it, you dig in, maybe you get frustrated, but it doesn't last long because your desire to learn the guitar is much stronger than whatever that frustration is. And you work through it, and then you get better at it quickly, and then you keep going, and as you're getting better, that makes you feel good, so it feeds itself, and it becomes this like virtuous cycle until you're a great guitarist. On the flip side, if you're walking into a classroom knowing it's your least favorite thing, fully believing that you're terrible at this, then what are you going to do? You're going to sit down, you're going to be disengaged, you're going to kind of like hate it, be angry, be frustrated, freak out if an assignment gets given to you that's due by the end of the period. And so obviously you're not thinking straight, you're not learning anything, your attention is not on it, and of course you don't learn anything by the end of class. And what do? You go, see, that's because I'm bad at math. Instead of saying, see, that's because I'm in this state of being emotional and negative about it.
This temporary state, and that my emotions are driving my attention, they're driving my choices, they're driving how I perceive everything.
Yeah.
And, that's the big thing is that it's always, part of this strange experience for us of tutoring has always been that, we'll have students and they'll be like, I hate this is terrible, blah, 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 blah. But then I love this and I'm amazing. And so there's always this weird tension. Like, for example, the student we mentioned in the first podcast who, spoke fluent Japanese as a non-native speaker, but then was struggling with high school algebra. And it's like, math is a language, dude. You can learn it. You can pick it apart in the same way that you picked apart freaking Japanese.
You just decided that you love Japanese.
And that you hate math and it's not for you. And so the profile of emotions that that student or so many of our students are experiencing around, say, video games as compared to around Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And they're experiencing them in totally different ways.
Yep.
And you, for example, have a great story about teaching Shakespeare to kids of different ages.
Yeah. Well, this is a bunch of years ago now, but living in New York, and I was teaching Midsummer Night's Dream. I was teaching Shakespeare to a couple of different classrooms in this one school in New York, a bunch of 5th graders and a bunch of 8th graders. And on the first day, we walked into the 5th grade classrooms, 10-year-olds, and we present the material to them. And, we kind of describe what it's going to be. And they're all instantly into it. Just like, yeah, Midsummer Night's Dream, fairies, sword fights, like, yeah, magic, right? And so they're all totally engaged right away. And we get right into rehearsing and picking apart the text with them. And they had a great time. And then like an hour later, the 8th graders walk into the room. And we start the same exact way, and it was like pulling teeth to get them to start even, and to not make, they just all looked terrified and furious and completely annoyed that they had to do this. And I was like, what is the difference? It's literally just that somebody by this point in their lives has told them Shakespeare is hard.
And the irony is that the older kids should find Shakespeare easier because they've got more reading experience.
Exactly.
They're older. And it's not that anybody is sitting around and saying, now, here is Shakespeare. Every time you see his face, you should experience extreme dread and fear and anticipation.
But that mythology that like Shakespeare is impossible and like, why can't this play just be in English? Yeah. And I'm like, it is in English. But somebody has told them that, and so of course then they treat it like a poisonous snake.
That's right.
And it's not a poisonous snake. And the little kids didn't have that emotional response, so they were able to engage right away. And that's what you do when you don't know something is hard. That's right. Right? And when you think something's going to be the worst thing ever, you go into it already kind of having your attention not open to learning it.
That's right. And we recently were giving a talk at Los Angeles Valley College, and one of the people in the room there, one of the tutors, she gave this great thing that her psychology professor had told her, which is the test is not a lion. And so the thing is that your math test or your Shakespeare test or whatever it may be, it may not be a lion, but very often people feel about it like it is a lion.
It feels like a lion, yeah.
And so those emotions then drive how you're engaging with that and how you're interpreting that. But so the key thing here is that people, you need to learn to check in with your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So once you know about Descartes' error, you now know that thinking and feeling are always linked. Yep. You know that you are always being emotional. Mm-hmm. So the question is not, am I being emotional?
You're super emo.
You're super emo,
You're
and
so
welcome to the club. We're all
together.
emo. All humans have always been emo.
So emo. Yeah.
But so you are emotional. We know that.
Yeah.
That's a given.
I'm okay with that.
Right?
Yeah.
But the question is, what emotion are you in?
Yes.
What emotion? How are you being emotional? What emotion is driving your choices? How strong is that emotion? And then the question is, what is the emotion? And so what, a lot of what it's super simple. But very often it's just teaching students to pay attention to what the emotion is. Because you're in the test, your mind is blank, and then you just teach them to be like, what's going on? Oh, I'm totally freaked out.
Yeah.
I'm so freaked out right now. And then how do you deal with those emotions? Well, we talk about doing what we call a reset.
That's right. That's the great news. You're actually completely in control of your emotions all the time. Sure, sometimes they catch you by surprise. They spring up, something happens. You're like, I don't even know why my eyes are filling with tears right now. Bing bong, no! Right.
Bing bong, yes.
No, oh my God, what a sacrifice. But you actually are in control of your emotions, and there's an easy way to know that, because you can picture yourself driving down the highway, say, and there's a car that's coming up behind you that is swerving in and out of lanes. Seems very dangerous. And it's Hunter, because he's not a good driver. But it was you see this car swerving in and out of lanes, and you're thinking, this guy's so dangerous. What a jerk. Da da da. And then that car pulls up beside you, and you see that it's a guy, and his wife is in the passenger seat, and she's in labor, and instantly you're not mad anymore. You're like, oh no, oh, go, please, by all means, pass me, and I'll help you to get around this other piece of traffic so that you can get to the hospital, because you know that now being furious is not an appropriate emotion for what's happening. The guy's not being a jerk. Right. The guy is freaking out and panicking and trying to do the best thing for his future progeny. So it's okay. Yep. Right? In the same way, you've probably been in a hallway or something, and somebody bumps into you from behind, and you get pissed, right? And you turn around, and then you realize it's your friend, and they're just joking around, and you don't punch your friend. You don't go through with the emotion. You switch your emotion. You're like, come on. And then you're fine. You're back to being happy. So you do have control over your emotions if you just are contextualizing.
That's right.
Is this the right emotion for what's happening? Oh, no, it's not. Now you switch it, and you can switch it on a dime.
Yeah.
And so if you're aware of it, you can also switch it during a test.
Yep.
During the middle of a class. Anytime that you need to, you can check in with yourself, say, okay, this is actually how I'm feeling, and this feeling makes no sense for what I'm doing right now, because it's not going to help me. So how can I flip it?
That's right. And there are lots and lots of resets. A reset is just something you tell yourself. So it could be the test is not a lion, if that's a phrase that really works well for you. Could just be taking a deep breath in the middle of your test and just going super dramatically. Yeah. It can be, just sort of refocusing and being okay, I'm freaking out. That's okay.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to take this one step at a time. Right? And I'm just going to break it down. I'm going to write down everything. I'm going to remember all the things my teacher or my mom or somebody else has told me, and really just take it really slowly, bit by bit. So there are lots of ways where you can say, okay, I may really not want to do this right now, but I'll tell you what I do want. And sometimes these resets are motivational.
Yeah.
So you may not, be focused on, learning for learning's sake or anything like that. In the short term, it just might be that, your mom or your dad has told you that unless you get that report card up or unless you get your homework done, that you can't use the car this weekend.
And that's enough.
That's
enough
great.
To be in a test and be freaking out and then be like, I gotta calm myself down because I want to use the car. All right, get back into it. Just think about that car. Here we go.
That's right.
And that's enough to get the emotion out of your way.
That's right. And over time, so, there's a John Haidt has this great metaphor for the brain, which is that the brain is like a rider and an elephant. So the elephant is your, emotional brain. right? And it's this big...
The elephant is your feelings.
It is your feelings. And it's this big, lumbering behemoth, this beast.
Yep.
And it has things that it wants to do. And sometimes it goes left, and sometimes it goes right. Sometimes it goes charging ahead because it's in a fear state. And then on top, there's this little rider that is your ability to sort of reflect, right? And rather than just sort of react emotionally in a situation. Right. And so, if you keep reflecting... right? And you keep on just sort of thinking and thinking and thinking. And you notice that there's a facial expression that goes with reflection of like, it's kind of like rolling your eyes back in your head.
You're like looking up in the sky.
Yeah.
Thinking face.
Thinking face.
Yeah.
But if you're reflecting, then over time you can reflect on and become more aware of your emotions. And then over time you can become better and better at managing them and retraining them. And so you can start to nudge the elephant bit by bit by bit by bit.
Yeah.
So that over time, so let's say that I start out, and we'll have students like this who are totally freaked out about math. And then you're like, okay, like let's just calm down and let's just start working our way into the math, working through the material. And over time, they get more and more comfortable with the material. And as they know it, then their elephant, rather than rushing to fear, is sort of the default becomes that, oh, it's math. I can handle this. This is okay.
Yeah, and keep in mind, the goal is not to never have any of these emotions, because that's not realistic, right? Yeah. Life is what life is. You can't predict a pop quiz. You can't predict scary things that come up or frustrating things that come up. The emotions will still always happen. It's just about training yourself to be faster and faster at getting yourself back on track.
That's right.
So it's just that rather than getting into that fear state and staying there for the entire length of a class or for the entire length of a job training you're doing or whatever that is, they're able to recognize it sooner and sooner. And that's automaticity, just like anything else.
Yep.
You can automate how you control your emotions. So if over and over again you notice that you go into a state of fear whenever this thing happens, you can automate, get that myelin going, and make yourself faster and faster at getting back on track.
That's right. Your elephant can be retrained.
Yeah.
Your elephant can learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's a lot of what school is about. Is, if you think about it, here's a great sort of thought experiment, right? We've got a student who hates school, thinks school is a total waste of time, blah, 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 blah. And then we flip a switch. And overnight, now the emotions are they love school, they think all their subjects are fascinating, they're curious, they're so fired up, they can't wait to, go to school. Well, what are they going to be the experience of these two students?
Right.
They're going to be totally different. And simply the right emotional context, the right feelings about a lot of these subjects, that then drives a series of choices that lead to excellent performance, lead to, a really satisfying experience of school, and just sort of lead to better and better results.
Yeah, and in those two examples, school didn't change.
Yeah.
The same stuff was happening in the class. The same material was being taught. It's just about the approach.
That's right.
And it's true that your brain likes to be in a state of joy and curiosity and openness when you're learning, because you have better control of your attention, so you can put that spotlight on what you need to learn, and then you're automating it. Like, being in that place emotionally is the fastest and most efficient way to learn something new. So that's why when you're feeling good, if you've ever had that experience of getting really engrossed in something that you love, and then you suddenly blink yourself out of that state and you're like, oh my God, it's been 4 hours I was doing this. I don't know, the time flew by. It didn't feel like work at all. Well, of course it didn't feel like work. You were in a positive emotional place. You got a lot done because you were so engaged, and you probably got a lot better in that stretch of time. And that's why it's all emotions.
And so there are learning appropriate emotions and learning inappropriate emotions, but there's one emotion that probably drives people's choices in school more than any other. And that's what we're going to be talking cliffhanger about in the next podcast.
Absolutely.
Stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to the Straight A Conspiracy with your hosts, Katie O'Brien and Hunter Motz. While Katie and Hunter are the faces of this podcast, they couldn't do this on their own. They have been lucky enough to have a group of dedicated people help them to get these ideas out there. Brian Jennings, a media literacy expert and author from Rhode Island, edits all of the podcasts. Andrew Hunt in LA helped film and record them. Mandy Ainsley in Johannesburg, South Africa, created a better website. And Josh McKenty, a marketing guru from New Zealand who wishes that he had this book when he was a kid, is devoting his time and energy to make the message of the Straight A Conspiracy accessible to everyone, everywhere. And you can help too. To find out how, visit thestraightaconspiracy.com. It's time for everyone, everywhere to know their own potential and get equipped with the tools to unlock it. While Katie and Hunter love books, they are also screenwriters, directors, and actors. Josh McKenty had the idea to make a multimedia online version of the Straight A Conspiracy. We're calling it the Straight A Conspiracy Bootcamp. It's the one-stop shop to onboard humans into the 21st century. It will be entirely digital so we can distribute it to millions of people that much faster. If you want to support the podcast and this movement in an easy way, simply visit thestraightaconspiracy.com and click on the Amazon affiliate link before you make any purchase. Amazon will give us a piece of that sale. More money means more podcasts, and more money for a project we're very excited about, the Straight A Conspiracy Bootcamp.